Hi everybody, Bryan Production Manager at RolandDGA again. Thank you for coming by another episode of In the Shop. Today we're going to discuss issues to do with tracking of material through your printer. So many of the Roland devices are media fed, where you're loading the roll behind and comes out the front. Well, especially if you're doing something like print and cut, you're going to eventually run into potential issues depending on the quality of the material that you're loading, where the material is not tracking quite right. It's just going to happen. So the good news is when something like that comes around, there's ways you can get around it, and I'm going to show you how to get around it today. Okay, so talking about material tracking, the first thing we want to do is take a look at some of the parts involved that make tracking possible, that we from Roland, we're very proud of our system of media moving and how we control it. It's an excellent system. Let me show you all the parts involved. So you've got all of your pinch wheels, all right? Those are obviously creating that pinch pressure to hold the material tautly. And then these pinch wheels going across, the ones at the very end, so this guy and the one at the opposite end, these actually have a taper creating a pull so the material wants to lay flat. These are more for just direct down pressure to create multiple pinch points to increase the precision of the hold. So again, this last one over here is also tapered the opposite direction. So again, there's that pull apart from each other. And then you'll also notice all of these open holes in the bed of the machine. These create the airflow that we require to create a vacuum. So the fans are actually pulling down and pulling that material flat, and again creating a whole nother point of precision. As long as that material is flat and stable, we're going to feed better. And then we're going to go around the back and cover one more area, and that is right down here, these flanges and these rails here. So from the factory, as long as the machine was set up correctly, this will all have a very, very good alignment. So that's really critical, because this is the first point where the material is going to be coming up into the machine, is where these occur. Make sure that they're in line and that there's nothing that it could intersect back here. So the area back here is open. And on top of that, we also have both of these that have the ability, or they have some pre-built in braking. So that's a little bit of back tension so that this isn't freewheeling. So that little bit of back tension on something that is aligned is going to help us create that flow through the machine and keep everything tracking straight. So those are the important components. Now let's go back up front and let's talk a little bit about correction. So one application we should talk about is the print-only type, where you've got, let's just say, a very long print job. There's no cutting involved. In that case, you're strictly moving material through to the front, one direction, that's it, and you're going to be done. Now, there are occasions where perhaps you might find a skew involved with that type of job, but I'll show you what we can do or what we should check. So right away, again, we talked about the loading aspect, making sure that when you're coming up into the device that the material is coming through straight. Sometimes when people pull the material up, they might accidentally kick it to one side. Now the problem is you come through the printer with that skew already in, goes to the take-up, and the take-up unfortunately can't correct for a mistake like that. So eventually you're gonna see that there's a problem with the skew. It'll slowly keep creeping as it prints, and you'll basically risk coming off from underneath one of the pinch wheels, left or right. And then you've got a big problem. Your print's now unusable. You have to reload and start over. So again, that aspect for print only is all about getting the material from the back to the front to the take-up very straight. And the best way to do that, again, is starting slow, go from the back to the front, take the tension, pull down the center. Again, you can check your alignment from the front to the back. I sometimes will reach through the machine to the rear of the machine to the take-up flange, or the media feed flange, and actually manually rotate that front and back. So we basically start making sure the track is correct. Then once I've done that and I'm far enough below, I get it taped to the core. Again, multiple points of tape to make sure it's been attached straight. And then once you've done that, you've loaded, everything is set up, I'll go to the move direction on the front control panel, hit the down arrow, and I'll simply start tracking. So at this point, with the media protection strip taken off, I can actually see that the material is tracking straight, so I'm protected from any skew. So this is a good check, and you're welcome to go ahead and just push the up arrow and basically send the machine backward. So this is on a VG3 right now. So there you go. So that's just your print-only type job. Let's move ahead and we'll talk a little bit about the more complex is the print and cut jobs where the material is free floating and moving backwards and forwards. Okay, so in this section we're going to talk more about dealing with moving the material forward and back. So this could be a print and cut job, but bottom line is you may or may not have a free floating area of material. So it's come off the back, you're not pulling from a roll anymore. So in that case, let's assume that it's a print and cut job. That's a very common aspect. So if you come in tight, I'm going to show you, we've got these pre-printed dots. This is the alignment points. So here's origin, there's another one at the far edge. So when I'm loading for a job like this, what I'll typically do is when I get it coming into the printer, I'm going to make sure that I'm on the inside of this pinch wheel here. I'm going to take that first dot at the origin and I'm putting my finger on top, and this channel that has the cutter protection strip, I can actually feel that perfectly under that dot. So since I've got that one loaded, I'm going to push really hard, lock it in. I'm going to now move over to the other side, and you can see I can still take this material and skew the heck out of it. But all I want to do is get it so it's hovering that dot directly over that cutter protection strip like it is on the right. And now with my 2 index fingers, I can feel for sure that those 2 dots are right over that track. I'm going to drop the lever. That, most of the time, will work really well. But let's say that you've got to do something super critical where it has to move backward and forward with 0 movement. So now the next step I'm going to do is that I've loaded, if you come in tight, you can see right back here, I've got my first vacuum hole is right at the edge of that material. So that's going to be my line of sight that I'm going to gauge if it's doing well. So I'm going to go to my move command and start bringing the material through here by holding the down arrow. While I'm doing that, I'm looking at the edge of that material moving right next to that dot. And sure enough, it is moving, the material slowly creeping to the right edge. It's starting to cover that dot. I'll stop it here so you can zoom in and see that it's actually covering a slight section of that vacuum hole in the back. So that being said, all I'm going to do now is I'm going to lift the lever. I'm going to send the sheet back. Now we're going to repeat the first steps. We're going to basically take that dot and we're going to get our finger locking it in on this side. That's good. But now, before I throw the lever down, I'm actually going to take the right edge and I'm going to do a little bit of a push backwards. So if you can imagine, I'm basically taking that sheet and I am pointing it in the direction it was moving. I know it sounds backwards. That's what you need to do. So let's take a look again. Here's the vacuum hole. Here's the edge of the material. And I push this down arrow. Just keep an eye on that movement to see if we've corrected for it. So I'm moving it forward. And what I'm seeing is nearly perfect. If there's any movement, it's so imperceptible, I can't pick up on it. And that is pretty much it. You've just corrected for that slight amount of skew that you had. So now I would honestly say that with that little skew in there, you could go a long distance and not have a problem. So that one's how that's going to get handled and corrected. So hopefully that helps in that case. So let's say that you've tried the skew correction like I've showed you, and it's still not tracking the way you want. It can be due to a variety of factors, some of which you can't control. Maybe the quality of the material isn't quite up to spec. Maybe there's something physically happening at the end of the printer, coming in, coming out, who knows. And that correction isn't quite doing it as much as getting it corrected the way you need. Couple things you can try. So in the menu system here, you can try changing your media suction force. So that's a setting within the printer here. Typically it's set to auto. That way, as you change the width of the pinch wheels, it automatically will raise or lower the vacuum pressure. By lowering that pull, so let's say it's auto, I would take it down to, let's say, 20 or 30%. That decreases that suction that's so hard. That suction sometimes on some inexpensive materials with really flimsy liners can wreak havoc. It basically sucks so hard that that material starts dimpling and it can't pull it very well and it can't move very well. The moment anything isn't moving well, is binding in any place, you have to correct for it. You're not going to track correctly if anything's bound up, which leads me to another point. When you're doing big runs where it's moving back and forth, you have to clear the path front and back to make sure that media is free flowing front to back, that it's not binding, kinking, so the material isn't kinking on itself. That'll always create a little bit more skew because it's having trouble pulling directly and straight through the machine. So that's another key point. Again, and I'll re-emphasize this, think about the quality of the material that you're running. I've known so many times in the history of working through these types of machines where the quality of the material means everything. So consider what you're buying, perhaps maybe spend a little more and try an alternate material. Honestly, it's your best bet sometimes. So when you really have those trouble situations, you may have to move to some other manufacturer, better quality liners that have more rigidity. That always helps, period. The more rigid the material is, the better chance you're going to have of it tracking perfectly. I hopefully have covered the topics that you guys will need to correct for any kind of media misfeed. Again, it's an inevitability. A lot of the times it's nobody's fault. It just sometimes happens with certain materials, and there's nothing anyone can do except make corrections for it. And the only way to do that is, again, taking your time and patiently aligning the material to correct for any introduced skew that could be from the material manufacturing, could be to humidity and environmental issues around the printer. Honestly, there's a myriad of other issues that can be involved that cause a skew to occur. But like I said, the good news is today we've covered those topics. You have a little more ammo about what to do in those instances, and hopefully you keep your shop running, and that's the goal. Hopefully this has been helpful, and we look forward to seeing you again for another episode of In the Shop. Thanks.